Hello, this is Joe Trahan, welcoming you to the All Me podcast from the Taylor Heaton Foundation, whose mission is to enlighten the world to the truths about appearance and performance-enhancing substances. As the national leader on this subject, they communicate their educational messages through various methods, including this podcast. Thank you for listening and enjoy the show.
Hi, and welcome to the All Me podcast. My name is Tavis Piatoli, sports dietitian for the Taylor Heaton Foundation, and today I'm going to be your host. Have you ever wondered if when you eat a particular type of food on whether it can impact your performance? For example, should you eat right before a workout, or does consuming carbohydrates and/or protein after a workout improve strength and recovery? What if you are running a marathon? Should you consume something during that 3 to 5 hour event? In this podcast, we speak with Gatorade scientist and sports dietitian Lisa Heaton on the timing of macronutrients and how they impact performance, recovery, and endurance. Lisa explains the role of carbohydrates and protein pre, during, and post-exercise, as well as how much we need to maximize performance. We also discuss the role of carbohydrate and protein type and how they influence the outcome. Lisa has worked the sports nutrition realm since 2007 and is a board-certified specialist in sports dietetics with interest in sports nutrition, recovery, hydration, and performance. As a sports dietitian at the Gatorade Sports Science Institute, Lisa works with nutrition-related education and translation of research, as well as supports the athlete testing program. She also served as the sports dietitian for the Chicago Bulls for the 2015 to 2016 and 2016 to 2017 seasons. She joined GSSI in February of 2011 after working as the sports dietitian for the National Institute for Athletic Health and Performance in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. She completed her dietetic internship with the University of Houston and continued with the university to earn her master's degree in exercise science. In July of 2009, Lisa earned her certified credential in sports dietetics through the Commission on Dietetic Registration, the premier credential for sports dietitians. We'd like to thank Gatorade and our partners for sponsoring this podcast. Lisa, thank you so much today for joining the All Me podcast. I'm excited to have you.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. I'm excited to be here.
So we're talking about a really cool topic called nutrient timing. We're going to get into that in just a second, but it's going to really be a cool way to talk about how nutrition is applied pre, during, post-workout. But before we kind of dive into today's topic, let's learn a little bit about you. So tell our listeners about your career path and why did you get into the field of sports nutrition and move towards your role with GSSI?
Sure. Yeah. So where I am right now, I am an associate principal scientist with the Gatorade Sports Science Institute. I work within our engagement program. My specific area that I lead is our internal and external education. So creating materials for practitioners, professionals to use to make their practice easier. My career path, I am a sports dietitian. I did my undergraduate degree in foods, nutrition, and dietetics at Bradley University. And my first spark related to sports nutrition was actually a summer interim class that I took while I was in college. I had no idea it was even a potential career. And when I was first coming into becoming a dietitian, there weren't a ton of positions out there, but the idea of sports nutrition and performance nutrition was really fascinating to me. So when I chose where I was going to apply for my dietetic internships, I looked for locations that also had a related exercise science or exercise physiology graduate degree program where I could get some credits for my internship and then go into an actual master's program. I chose to do that because I wanted to diversify my education a little bit more than sticking straight with nutrition, because I really started to feel passionate about doing sports nutrition. So I did that through the University of Houston, and it was a great program, great experience. I have a number of mentors from that time that I still stay in touch with today. My first jobs, though, after I passed the RD exam, I worked in a long-term rehab hospital that did spinal cord and brain injuries. But what's really interesting about that, because it was long-term rehab, there's actually a number of things I learned there that still apply when I talk about injury recovery with athletes. And so that was a really unexpected but great experience for me as I moved into my future roles. My first sports-related job, I moved to Sioux Falls, South Dakota, as part of the Sanford Hospital System, working with their sports medicine program, an institute specifically for athletes, and did a number of different things. I practiced as a dietitian there, working with different clients that wanted to improve their nutrition. I worked with it was the D League at the time, but the Sioux Falls Skyforce out there. It's the G League now, but I worked with that team for several seasons. And I was also involved in the research that they did there, a lot of research related to thermoregulation and athlete safety, biomechanics. And then through mentorship, volunteering with it was the Sports Cardiovascular and Wellness Nutrition Dietetic Interest Group. My mentor knew I was trying to get to the Chicago area, and she heard about an open role with GSSI and alerted me to it and gave a great recommendation for me. And the rest is history. I joined GSSI in 2011, and I have been part of the team since, doing both education and service related work, and occasionally pitching in with our research team when they need hands or they need pilot subjects for different studies. So it's been a very varied path, but I've enjoyed it, and I've learned a lot at every stop I've made along the way.
That's awesome. Now, 12 years, wow, and still going strong, and that's fantastic that you had just a great career path and still, plugging along with GSSI. So thank you for sharing that information. Let's dive into today's topic, nutrient timing, right? The first question we want to kind of get in, people going, what does that mean? So what is nutrient timing? Is there like a specific definition you can provide for our listeners?
The way I would explain it is it's being strategic about the foods you're eating, things you're drinking, in order to maximize your performance and then recovery afterwards, to make sure you're getting the most out of your workouts or your trainings, and then preparing your body and helping it recover to be ready to go for the next bout, whether it's the same day or the next day or a few days later. So nutrient timing is really a strategy in order to make sure you're getting specifically what your body needs in that moment.
Now, carbs seem to be just demonized in the world of influencers, consumers. Everyone's scared to eat carbs. So I want to talk about them first. First of all, what's the purpose and significance of carbohydrates when it comes to timing in athletic performance?
Carbs are the fuel that your body really wants to use during exercise. And we have done a number of metabolic tests that you can, when athletes are exercising, to see as intensity increases, the reliance of the body on carbohydrate as a fuel source significantly increases. And at those highest intensities, it is 99% of the fuel that the body will be using. So I find it fascinating that the carbs are demonized now. When I was growing up, it was fat, and things are constantly changing, and there's always something we want to target. But really, carbs are the fuel the body, the brain want to use, and are the most efficient fuel source for them to use during exercise. And the brain all the time, that is the fuel source that it uses. So carbs themselves shouldn't be demonized. You have to look at the total diet and overall calories and diet quality, because the whole picture matters. It's not just one macronutrient. But we want athletes to be strategic and make sure they are putting the right fuel into their body so that they can perform and then recover as well.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that I remember when I was in college, and we were probably in college around the same time, it was like fat-free was like the thing, right? You could just fat-free devil's cookies. I was like, wow, these things are fat-free. That's good. And I'd eat a whole box not knowing it as an 18-year-old. It's probably going to be a little too much sugar I'm consuming when I'm not active. But like you said, it's moving around in different things of what people want to pick on as what's bad or good, which I don't like those terms. Now, protein. This seems to kind of be the king with the youth athlete, where they think just massive amounts of protein will help build muscle. But let's kind of talk about the purpose and significance of protein when it comes to timing and athletic performance. I know we're going to kind of dive into different parts of the workout soon, but where does protein fit in?
So protein fits when we're talking about structure. It is a nutrient that's important for building your muscles, the actual structure of your muscles, production of hormones. There's all sorts of different functional roles for protein from a structure standpoint throughout the entire body. And we don't store extra protein, and your body will use what it can at a given moment. So and this has been around for a long time too, the really high doses of protein they're not getting the benefit they think they are out of it. Being more, again, strategic and consuming protein at regular intervals throughout the day, trying to eat every 2 to 4 hours, depending on what your goal is actually going to do more for your body than taking, say, 2 meals or just an evening meal that has a really large amount of protein in it. We want to make sure that, especially if they're buying any sort of supplement, those get costly. Food right now is costly in general, so we want to make sure that they're able to get the most out of what they're eating. So paying attention to the timing so that they can get that benefit is really important.
Now, let's kind of dive into different parts of workouts, right? Because this is where timing can make a big difference. I want to go pre-workout first. And when I say pre-workout for listeners, this is not a pre-workout supplement. This is pre-workout nutrition. First of all, my first question around pre-workout nutrition: does intensity and or duration of training determine if you need, let's say, carbohydrates before a workout? For example, if someone's about to do a 30 or 60 or 90-minute morning run or intense lifting session, should they consume some carbs, or is this dependent on the individual and their goals?
I think there's two pieces to this, because timing comes into play as well. If they are waking up in the morning and going straight to their workout after an overnight fast while they've been asleep, taking in some carbohydrate will probably help them to feel better because they've used up most of what's been stored in their liver overnight while they've been sleeping. So paying attention to when they're going to be doing their training is also very important. If their goals matter too, I think if you are someone who is interested in restricting carbs to overall restrict calories, this is a strategic moment where carbs probably can help you so that you can get the most out of your workout. And it doesn't have to be significantly large amounts, especially if you are a forever athlete or just a passionate exerciser. Performance isn't your main goal. Small amounts are still going to be beneficial pre-workout.
Is there a specific amount of carbs recommended for an individual or athlete before they train? Like, is there a certain guideline that you recommend, or a certain amount depending on what they're doing?
Yep. So when we are talking to really competitive athletes, we will say 1 to 4 grams per kilogram. And that's about 0.45 to 0.54 grams per pound. And, I'm sorry, I got that wrong. 0.45 to 1.8 grams per pound. And when we want them to take that in the 1 to 4 hours before they're planning to train. Now, 4 grams per kilogram is a lot of carbohydrate, and I don't know many athletes who can really take in that much. So we try to be strategic with them in terms of timing and amount, what's going to sit well in their gut, so we're not going into practice or a game feeling sick, and finding the exact amount that's going to really help them have the energy they need to start performing well. For someone who's more of a recreational exerciser, I would go probably on the lower end of that spectrum and several hours before exercise, and then taking in around 30 grams in the hour before you start. I mean, that could be a piece of fruit. It could be a half a sandwich, just depends on what they want to do, a granola bar, something like that, just to get a little bit of energy so that as they start their workout, they have some carbohydrate getting on board immediately.
Now, when we look at source or type of carbohydrate, does it matter if that source is a liquid or solid before an exercise session? Do you have a specific recommendation, or does it depend on the person?
I think it depends on the person, and it depends on how their gut reacts to different types of foods. Some people, especially if you're competing and are nervous, sometimes those solid foods just don't sit well in the gut, and so liquids are what I would recommend for them. Some people have iron guts and can eat whatever they want right before they start exercise and are fine. So really, it comes down to the preference of the person when it comes to liquid or solid. Now, if you are picking something solid, and I think this probably gets into one of our future questions a little bit. The closer you get to exercise, the less fiber you're going to want in that carbohydrate source, because that actually slows the digestive process down, and that carb can sit in your stomach a little bit longer. So really, if we're talking about solids, I would look at the overall profile of what that carbohydrate has in it. The less fiber, the better when we're talking about pre-workout specifically.
Yeah, and that kind of led to was going to really lead into my next question is there, or are there certain types of carbs that just may not be good to consume before a workout that could maybe impair performance or cause GI distress?
Yeah, I would really limit ones that are high fiber, just again, because of the digestive process. We want to get that energy into the body as quickly as we can, especially in that hour before exercise, and not have a lot sitting in the gut. So really look for something that is lower in fiber at that occasion.
So listeners, what Lisa's saying is stay away from the Brussels sprouts, the onions, the broccoli, whole grain pasta. That's probably not going to be an ideal pre-workout nutrition food.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Something simple, like an applesauce, a piece of fruit, a granola bar that doesn't have a lot of fiber in it, cereal, something that's easy and portable too, especially if you're on your way to the gym or to the field or to the pickleball courts, whatever your exercise is, something small and easy to consume that's low in fiber. Yep.
Let's shift over to protein a little bit, because a lot of people think maybe I need to consume a ton of protein before I go work out. Is protein of any benefit before an exercise session, or really does this depend on the type of exercise, let's say lifting versus an endurance session?
With protein, again, there's kind of two ways to look at this, especially if you're eating 2 to 4 hours before exercise. There's a satiety component to protein that helps you to feel full, so you're not starving when you start exercise. But protein can also slow down the digestive process. So the closer you get, the less you probably want to consume. For most types of exercise, there isn't a significant benefit to consuming protein. In some cases with resistance type exercise where hypertrophy is really the goal, taking in some protein can have some benefit, but again, it comes back to what their gut can tolerate. Not everyone can handle that type of food close to the workout occasion. So in general, especially in that hour beforehand, I don't recommend typically to take in protein. But if they want to have some with that meal, 1 to 4 hours out, it's okay. It's a meal. It's not supposed to be just a small snack, but the real performance benefit is going to come from the carbohydrate they're eating.
Now, if you do recommend protein, as a meal or before an event, is there a specific amount that someone should consume before that workout?
Similar to fiber, I would just limit it the closer you get. If you're eating 3 to 4 hours out, a normal meal amount is probably fine, where we do 0.25 to 0.3 grams per kilogram of protein. That's probably okay if you're 3 to 4 hours out, and just pare it down after that point.
Now, what about avoiding that? Are there certain types of protein that you say these are things that you probably they're going to make you feel sluggish? Is it like high fat meats or certain types of protein rich foods that are just a no-no, may cause fatigue, may impair performance, things like that?
Oh, and you made the point about high fat meats. Fat, again, is another one that slows down the digestive process. So you probably don't want to have a huge meal that has a lot of fat and really, really high in protein beforehand. You can stick with something easy, what the gut can actually tolerate, whether it's just a small amount of chicken on a sandwich that they're having to get some carbs in there too, or a cheese stick with a piece of fruit as a smaller snack as they're getting closer to it. But yes, avoiding ones that are really high in fat, and whether it's saturated or unsaturated. We in this occasion, limiting fat overall is also recommended.
Yeah, and I know, as you mentioned before, it's just going to take a lot longer. You got protein and fat. They're two nutrients that take just a long time to break down. And when you have too much of those before, it's just going to make, we've seen athletes feel pretty sluggish, and that's not something that they should focus on. Now, as we close out this topic on pre-workout nutrition, my last question is really looking at, should we look at maybe consuming both carbs and protein? Is that more advantageous than consuming a singular nutrient?
I think that's the realistic way to look at eating, especially if you're talking about some type of meal. You're always going to have a mix of the macronutrients Again, if you're in that meal window where you're 2 to 4, 3 to 4 hours out from exercise, I think it is advantageous because, again, having that protein in there promotes satiety. So they're not going to be going into the workout feeling overly hungry. But again, the closer they get, the more the focus should be on carbohydrate. And in that hour beforehand, I would solely look at carbohydrate from a nutrient perspective.
Excellent. All right, let's shift over to during, because I've gotten so many questions over the years about what should you consume during a race and during an event or during this. So we'll talk about the timing shortly, but what would be the purpose of consuming calories during a workout? Like, what are the benefits there?
So the duration of your workout is going to matter here. If you're performing for under an hour and you have had your carbohydrate beforehand, you probably don't need to take any specific type of carbohydrate in during your workout. If you have gone into your workout completely fasted, I would then say maybe you want to have 30 grams roughly throughout the hour just to get some fuel on board, especially if you're starting to feel sluggish towards the end of those workouts. Now, if it's someone who is planning to train or work out or compete for over an hour, then we would want to start strategically consuming carbohydrate, 30 to 60 grams per hour, and starting in that initial hour, not waiting till that hour is over, because we only store a finite amount of carbohydrate in our muscles, and that is the fuel, again, that your muscles are using during exercise. And as you use up that fuel, you start to feel more fatigued, and you can't convert the energy from that macronutrient when it's not there for your muscles to use for energy. So we want to put a little bit more on board so they can continue to perform at the level you need them to perform at.
I see these individuals at the gym, like they're consuming smoothies or ready to drinks during their workouts. And I'm wondering, do they really need that? And maybe they didn't have anything to eat for quite a while and they're hungry and they want to get something in the system. But I know you mentioned about an hour, but is there a true rule of thumb about how long that training session should be before you start consuming calories?
I think if you know you're going to be training for over an hour, I would start within the first 15, 20 minutes and just take small amounts in over the course of that hour, between that 30 to 60 gram mark. If they're going to be out, say for an endurance athlete who is training for 3, 4, 5 plus hours, then we would look at maybe even more, up to about 90 grams per hour. But again, we need to be strategic about the type of carbohydrate they'd be consuming there. So really it's how long they plan to be out there. Now, if you're at a gym where there's a lot of chatting and you're not doing quite as much, that we might look a little bit differently at this. But if you're going hard in the gym, on the court, on the field for more than an hour, I would definitely recommend starting consuming carbohydrate within the first 15, 20 minutes and just regularly consuming it until your workout is done.
Excellent. When we talk about the most important macronutrient, I know we're focusing on carbs and proteins. We're not going to really address fat today, but is there one that's more important than the other when during a long workout or a long event? Should the focus be more on carbs or protein, and why?
Absolutely, carbohydrate, and simple forms of carbohydrate, something that is going to get into the system quickly and easily and not have as high a risk for any GI distress like the upset stomach, or on the other end, getting the runs with some people if they're sensitive to it. The only time I would really look at potentially recommending some protein would be for more on the ultra endurance side of things, where the overall intensity tends to be a little bit lower, and they're going for 7, 8 plus hours, where we probably do want to take some protein in just because of the overall duration. But even in that case, it would be small amounts. It wouldn't be a significant amount. The overall focus would still be on carbohydrate.
Now, you mentioned simple forms, right? And that's kind of perfect for my next question, because there's different sources of carbs, right? Maltodextrin, sucrose, dextrose, and we don't have to get into the specifics of all of those, but does it really matter? Is one more beneficial, or is there a type that's beneficial to consume during these long training sessions?
So the ones we want to look for are ones that will be what we call quickly oxidized, or actually converted from the carbohydrate into energy by the body. And the ones you just listed, maltodextrin, sucrose, dextrose, which is just the mirror image of glucose, those ones get into the system quickly and the muscles can use them very quickly. There are Some other types of carbohydrate, like fructose that you're going to find in fruits, that one is oxidized at about half the rate of the other. So that is not one that I would typically recommend for an athlete who is only going for 1-2 hours. Again, if we get into the endurance space, we can be strategic with fructose. But for most athletes, you're going to want to look for the types that you just mentioned, that maltodextrin, sucrose, dextrose, glucose, those types of things on the label.
Now, you kind of mentioned the marathons, the triathlons, the ultra, these long events in 6-7 hours that people are participating in. Some people like nutrition bars. I've seen some people consume food. What's your professional advice on using maybe food versus liquid during these types of events? Does it matter, or is it really just based on the individual?
Individual preference is huge here, and what their gut can tolerate is also huge. And flavor fatigue in those types of events, especially the really, really ultra level ones, is big. So having a variety of sources that they know their gut can tolerate is helpful. Solids are potentially more likely to cause some of those GI issues depending on the type of solid it is, but they need to practice on those hard training days what is actually going to sit well in your gut. And also with carbohydrate, the other thing we can't ignore is hydrating. I mean, you have to have some fluid on board to get that carbohydrate into your gut, and athletes that are out training are going to be sweating as well. So we need to balance, especially if they're a heavy sweater, preventing them from losing more than about 2% of their body weight from sweat. This is an easy way to strategically add carbohydrate in if you're having a beverage that has fluid, electrolytes, and carbs in it, to get everything in one package. If they're choosing a solid form, they'll also need to consume a form of liquid with it. So that's another thing to consider when putting together that overall plan.
Excellent. Yeah, and you've mentioned, the amounts of carbs fuel we're going to be needing during these events and constantly throughout refueling. But would there be any place where protein could be consumed or should be consumed during a training session like this?
Only if they are going to be out training for multiple hours, that 4 or 5 plus. If someone's training for a marathon and they're out for 3 hours, I wouldn't. I would focus on the protein post-exercise and really highlight those carbs during.
Excellent. Yeah, and I know we're going to get to post-workout nutrition coming up. And actually, before we do, I have one more question for you, Lisa. What about consuming both? So would there be any beneficial, or do you know if consuming both carbs and protein during these types of events provide a better outcome, or would, again, just focus on carbs for now?
If we're talking about endurance, you're potentially going to be increasing risk for GI distress adding protein in there, unless it's those really long ultra endurance events where the intensity is a little bit lower. When we're talking about, again, muscle hypertrophy with lifting, there may be some potential, but again, that would be a case-by-case basis, and we would want to make sure that we aren't causing GI distress with those athletes as they're lifting.
All right, now we're shifting to post-workout nutrition. I know we might be shifting kind of who the macronutrient king is here, but this is kind of my favorite topic too. Is what's the purpose though? Like, what would be the true purpose or benefit to consume post-workout nutrition?
So if you remember when we talked at the beginning, protein is important for structure. It's important for structure in your muscles. It's important for structure within your cells. And post-workout nutrition is meant to help you repair any of the damage to those structures. And ultimately, I talk about protein in terms of the long game. Regular recovery is going to help you become more efficient at what you're doing, adapt to your training, reach those goals. So it's not a one-time window. You have to continuously repair the damage that you're doing, whether it's lifting and repairing significant muscle damage, or if it's aerobic with endurance training and building more mitochondria within the cell so you can actually have more potential for utilizing the energy that you're consuming. So the post-workout nutrition is really to help you adapt and recover so that you can perform better in the future.
Yeah, and this whole post-workout nutrition window seems to get a lot of attention. It's been talked about for so many years. We hear about the anabolic window of opportunity to make performance gains, especially in the weight room. Can you explain what this may mean is this focused on muscle growth, or does it include performance as well?
It includes both. And the idea behind it was really kicking off that recovery, and we only had a finite amount of time that we have enhanced muscle protein synthesis where we're building that muscle. But really, if you look at the state of the literature now, we see people or most individuals have signs of elevated muscle protein synthesis even 24 hours after that workout. So we know that if you can't take your protein in within 30 minutes of your workout, all hope isn't lost. It's helpful to consume it and really kickstart that recovery process, but then continue every 2 to 4 hours. Again, consuming protein is going to be important for continuous recovery overall, and putting the tools your muscles, your cells need to rebuild and repair continuously versus giving them one big dose and then not having anything else. You're actually not going to get the same benefit as if you just consume protein at regular intervals afterwards.
So what you're saying is spread this out throughout the day and just get adequate amounts, and that should be sufficient.
Absolutely. Yep.
All right. And protein's going to be we talked about carbs first for both pre and during. Let's talk about protein first. You've talked about the purpose, the structure, the muscle recovery, but and you even kind of pretty much answered this next question about how soon after a workout should someone consume. And you said, well, it doesn't have to be right away, but maybe it's, and I'm going to throw a random question out there. It's just maybe there's that kid that's trying to gain weight and he or she just wants calories, right? It's like if they are trying to maybe gain weight and build muscle and they're always in a calorie deficit, would maybe timing really make a big difference? Like, should they, hey, 30 minutes, let's get this in. That way you're not waiting too long. Would that be helpful?
Yes, and especially those high school boys who are just burning through calories naturally, and then you add exercise on top of it. What I recommend is as soon as possible, as soon as your gut can tolerate it. And maybe this is where a smoothie can come into play, where you either have a Greek yogurt or a protein powder mixed into there, or a ready to drink type thing. Sometimes those liquids go down a little bit easier in the first hour after a hard workout, and then have a meal an hour later or 2 hours later. If weight gain is the goal, then I would be consuming that protein every 2 to 3 hours, not every 2 to 4 hours. So it's a little nuanced, and we're talking about strategy depending on the athlete's situation. But as soon as they can tolerate taking it in, I would recommend starting that process.
Yeah, and people are constantly asking, well, how much do I need? Is there an ideal amount that's optimal? And is there an amount of protein that's really recommended post, or does it really?
Yeah, for a long time, we were saying around 20 grams for most athletes, 20 grams, 20 grams, 20 grams. So a lot of the sports nutrition products you'll see out there have 20 grams. But in the last, I'd say 5 to 6 years, we've really seen researchers tease out this 0.25 to 0.3 grams per kilogram, which is roughly 0.11 to 0.14 grams per pound of protein. But you also want a protein that's complete and one that has a high amount of leucine in it in order to really kickstart that recovery process. And then similar amounts of protein overall every 2 to 4 hours. That 0.25 to 0.3 grams per kilogram is really what's going to be providing that continuous, those building blocks for muscle recovery.
So you kind of hinted a little bit at the importance of leucine. And for those listening, that's a critical amino acid that's needed for post-workout exercise. But what are some of the best sources of protein post-workout to help maximize recovery?
Yeah, if you can tolerate it, the dairy sources, things like milk, Greek yogurt, those types of proteins are going to be the highest. But things like egg can be, if you want to eat eggs afterwards, can be beneficial if you're a vegetarian. Soy protein is a complete protein. It doesn't have quite the same amount of leucine, but I would prefer to see someone consume that versus nothing at all. Or there are some ready to drink type protein drinks out there now that have blends of different types of plant proteins. As long, and this is tricky, and this is where I would recommend working with a sports dietitian. You want to make sure that blend of protein is giving you all of those essential amino acids, the ones your body can't make, that you have to get through food. So there's products out there depending on the person, but leucine, it's the trigger. It's the trigger for muscle protein synthesis. Your muscles are already ready; they're primed to build and recover. And then the leucine really helps to turn that on and unlock that process.
Is that why whey protein is so popular, just because of the leucine content or even casein, things like that?
Yeah, so whey and casein are both components of milk protein.
Right.
The whey is a faster protein in terms of how quickly it gets into the body. So post-workout, whey is probably the one I would go with. From a casein standpoint, it's still a good protein, but it gets into the system much slower, and you don't see the same amount of muscle protein synthesis. The strategic time for casein, if you're talking about your kid who really is trying to gain weight or someone who is trying to get more muscle hypertrophy overall, taking some casein before bed, 20 to 40 grams, can actually help because it gets into the system slower. It takes your body longer to get into that fasted state overall. You have a little bit more protein on board to help continue muscle recovery as you fall asleep. So there's a strategic time for casein, but immediately post, if you're looking for an isolated protein source, I would pick whey over casein.
Great job on the protein side of things. Let's shift to carbohydrates as we kind of close out this topic. What's their purpose post-workout? Why are they important?
So we want to restore that glycogen that we broke down. And if you aren't taking in any carbohydrates, some of that protein that you take in will be used for that purpose. If you are doing 2-a-days or multiple types of training within 8 hours, then we want to restore that muscle glycogen so you can start your second session fueled. So taking in carbohydrate with that protein very strategically can help you with that. Now, if you have a full day or multiple days between your training sessions, just including carbohydrate with your overall meals will be enough to restore muscle glycogen. You need to be more purposeful about it when you know you're going to be training or competing again within 8 hours.
Is there a specific amount that's recommended, or is that based on body weight, type, exercise duration?
Yep, that's a body weight specific one as well. And again, this is if you're competing or training again within 8 hours. It's that 1 to 1.2 grams per kilogram or 0.45 to 0.54. The recommendation I accidentally gave before, that's when grams per pound, 0.45 to 0.54 grams per pound. Every hour for roughly 4 hours in order to fully restore muscle glycogen so you can compete again. If you have more time, whatever you consume in your general diet should be adequate to restore that glycogen.
Excellent. Now, when we look at carbohydrate type up here, if there's a place to consume sugar post-workout and during, obviously, but post-workout's a really good place to consume maybe what's considered higher glycemic carbs. Is that true, or is there a best type that you would recommend to have after a hard workout?
I would recommend whatever they can tolerate the most. And again, if we're looking at something that is more liquid based, you probably are going to get a more simple or higher glycemic potentially carbs. That's a very complicated topic when it comes to the glycemic index of different types of foods. I wouldn't worry overall too much about high or low. Just pick carbs that you can tolerate and they're going to sit well. And then as you have those subsequent meals, look for those more complex carbs. That's when you can start adding in the fiber, the whole grains, those types of things.
Got it. So it's really bottom line, just get what your body can tolerate. It just should be a good combination of good carbohydrates, no matter what the source is. And then my last question here is this where combining both carbs and proteins post-workout, would that be better than just consuming one or the other?
Yes, absolutely. I think so. And even for those people who are looking to reduce carbohydrate overall, for better or worse, have your carbs around pre, during, and post. And then if you want to limit a little bit more throughout the day, that would be the time. But you want to give your body what it needs to perform well and also to recover from your workout so that you are getting the most out of what you're doing.
Got it. Anything else we didn't cover today, Lisa, in today's podcast that you think our listeners should know about?
We didn't really cover hydration at all, but that could be its own podcast, and I think you've done some in that area before. But again, when we're talking about carbs, especially during, you have to have fluid on board in order to fully absorb them well and limit that GI distress. So just make sure you're aware of what your overall fluid needs, because everyone is going to be a little bit different in terms of what their sweat rate is, and making sure that you are hydrated when you start, avoiding losing too much weight during a workout, and then recovering those fluid losses afterwards as well. And that impacts recovery also, making sure your body is well hydrated.
Awesome. This was fantastic. Thank you so much. Now, we're not done. We have what's called the curveball round. You have no idea what I'm about to ask you. I just, these are 3 random questions I make up. The first question I want to ask you, though, is something I ask every guest, because I'm a love music more than probably anything else. I wish I would have been a musician, but I'm glad I'm a sports dietitian. It's a good third option for me to choose later in life. But if you could go back, or if you could be the lead singer of any music group or band, who would that be?
Oh, that's a really tough one. I don't know that I would want to be a lead singer in a band, but I would love to. I grew up listening to country. It's still one of my favorites. I would love to sing with Reba McEntire. I think she's got a phenomenal voice, and would love to sing with her. I don't think anyone would want me as the cover singer of an actual band.
So you're not maybe karaokeing to some bands in the house throughout the week?
I mean, you might need earplugs if I do.
All right. Now, what would today's Lisa go back and tell young Lisa? If you could go back to your younger self and let's say 20, 25, 30 years ago, what would you tell yourself?
You know what? So when I was in high school, I actually broke my leg, and I didn't know what I was doing from a nutrition standpoint, and I was terrified of gaining a lot of weight. So I actually did restrict calories in high school and lost weight. And you know what? I had a non-union in my fracture and ended up having to have surgery 3 or 4 months later. Now, if I had done my nutrition correctly, would that have made a difference? I don't know. I think it probably could have, being able to actually give my body the tools it needed from the recovery standpoint. So I really would tell myself that the nutrition's important. It's a piece of your training puzzle and your recovery puzzle overall, and making sure that you do give it the attention it deserves if you want the outcomes that you're going for.
Awesome. Now, my wife and I were talking about this last night. She's like, look, if you could have dinner with one athlete, one actor, and one musician, who would it be? But I was like, that's right. So I don't want to ask you all 3, but my question would be is, if you could have dinner with one athlete and one actor or actress, who would those be?
Oh,
I had to think about it for a little bit too. I was like, oh, this is kind of tough.
I'm trying to think of some of the best female athletes that, I've met several through my work as far as service, because I do help with some nutrition work with our athletes. I'd really like to meet right now. There's 2. I would love to meet Simone Biles, and I would love to meet Katie Ledecky.
Nice.
They're both, world record setters in their respective sports, and just amazing athletes. And they both seem like genuinely amazing people as well.
Yeah, they're just incredible athletes. Love seeing what Simone's doing now, and looking forward to the next Olympics. And Katie's just always been just an incredible athlete. Yeah, absolutely. Well, Lisa, thank you so much. This has been fantastic, incredible information. Always great chatting, and always great to have a guest from the Gatorade Sports Science Institute on our podcast, doing wonderful things. And thank you all so much for all the work that you do.
Great. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, that's it for today's show. Thanks for listening to the All Me podcast from the Taylor Heaton Foundation, a nonprofit organization leading a national campaign to enlighten people to the truths about appearance and performance-enhancing substances, and inspiring people to live and compete without the use of these substances. Please be sure to subscribe to our podcast and tune in to our next episode.